So we're live. I know you can't see me, but I can see both of us. I can see everything because, why not? And, oh, I wonder why it's not showing on the email. Let's see. There we go. Oh, I think there's an easier way to share it as well. Yeah, I just love like my. They want me to moderate. Adams, should we moderate the chat?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's not
So much
happening.
moderation.
Yeah.
So much moderation.
I'm not moderating any chats, Adams. Making it clear right now.
Like,
They can moderate themselves. Uh, yeah. Once again, I'm just sending a quick text. Let's see. Watch or participate. So, what I want to talk about first before we jump into anything. Uh, cool. What I want to talk about first before we talk about anything is get all the settings wrong, and then and then we could figure it out from there. That's my dream, Adams. Always have the settings wrong. Um, no, this is a discussion that a topic that I've had for a long time. How does it not know where the center is? Where's the center? Am I in the center? Yeah, you can't tell, Adams. You have no clue. Um, this is a topic that I've been thinking about for a long time, and this is not connected with the main discussion, which is going to be about Adam and Eve. This I would like to talk about Egypt and the connection with this. I was trying to figure out a good way to say this. Uh, Connection with the Old and New Testament as well as Apocrypha, but just like our beliefs in general are connected distinctly through Egypt. So there was a discussion about this that Dave had with Quick Media, and if you think about it, like there's the Adam and Eve story, and then you kind of jump to like uh, a list of the different like great people, and then you talk about Abraham, and then Moses, and then kind of Abraham, then Joseph, and then Moses, and then you kind of go jump down again to like when they left. Um, you have like the judges and the kings and everything. Anyway, it's interesting how much of it is actually through Egypt. Like that whole beginning part, other than Adam and Eve, is through Egypt. And then when Christ leaves Jerusalem, when he leaves Judah, he goes to Egypt. And it's just I've thought about it. I don't know if you've thought about it very much, but like just how connected um, all the Old Testament and even the New Testament is with Egypt. And then like for example, for us in the modern days, we have the Book of Mormon, which is supposedly written in Egyptian at least. You have, or at least Reformed Egyptian. You have the Pearl of Great Price, which has two different Egyptian things on it, and a lot of it has to do, I think, because of the connection with Adam and Eve. But there's a lot of connections with Egypt, and uh, I've just been thinking about that a lot. So I don't know if you have any immediate reactions. You're muted, so it's funny because you were typing and you weren't muted, and so I could hear you typing.
no, that's why I muted myself, was because I knew the typing was too loud. Um, I think I've had kind of similar thoughts to you, or as you, regarding Egypt, and it's one of those interesting things because like it seems like in a lot of these cultures, and it extended into Christianity as well, that for a long time there was kind of like a sacred language for scripture and text, that communication would be done through that.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know, I wonder if Egyptian played a role in that, like in Christianity, like Latin and Greek have effectively been kept alive because of the ancient scriptures.
Well, and it's
Like,
also funny
in,
about that because Greek was such an influence at such an early age in Christianity that they literally wrote the Septuagint in Greek just because there were so many like Hebrews or Jewish people outside of Judea, outside of
uh-huh.
Israel, that they're like, we need to convey this to them in like as best we can. Anyway, like, and that was at a very early age. So that was very early on. Greek was super part of it, and then like as you say, Latin now has continued. Greek and Latin have continued as a part of it, just because like those would have been, or at least Latin would have been a dead language other than that, so
Hmm.
apart from it.
So so imagine this, and this is just a thought I had, where you come out of Egypt, so you have a history and culture that's tied to Egypt. Now, I know that historians kind of argue about what group of people might have been the Israelites that came out of Egypt. Some people think it was a northern group that was just like that paid a lot of tribute to Egypt, that they weren't necessarily slaves. Um, but regardless, Egypt was like the dominating culture and country for a long time in that region. And so what are the chances that there weren't many sacred texts, or texts that the Israelites considered sacred, that were in Egyptian? I would kind of find it hard to believe that wouldn't have been the case, that at some point there exists, and I don't know what would have happened, but just the mere fact that some of your ancient texts are in Egyptian would keep some of the potential traditions that also came from Egypt alive, going along with it.
Yeah,
And
and mhm.
you can't separate that anyway. Like you can't. The United States is from England, and so there's a lot of English tradition that goes along with it, whether or not we recognize it or not.
Yeah, and that's why I kind of wanted to jump into, because there's stuff that like we know has Egyptian roots, like
Mm-hmm.
the beam and the moat pulling from your eye. That's an Egyptian story. There's other Egyptian stories like Psalms, amongst other things, that are like straight up in the Bible, and I don't have any problem with that. That's not something like when we're discussing that, I just want to preface that like I'm not like disturbed or bothered by any of this. I find it like um, I think that the Egyptians had a bunch of the truth. I think that like they had a direct connection with people who were trying to be good and try to do what was right. That doesn't mean they did do what was right or that they had any authority. They didn't have authority. It specifically says they didn't. But that's not even my argument. My main point is that like if you have a bunch of people that did what was right and that stuff is better recorded than a bunch of people who did everything that was perfect but it wasn't recorded, then what are you going to look to? So,
Uh-huh.
and I'm not, that's not my point either, because I don't think that the Israelites or that the Abrahamites or any of those people have that they did everything perfect. No one did anything perfect. Is my whole point. Some people just had the authority and some people didn't.
Well, all I know is that a lot, according to our scriptures, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, is that there were aspects of the Egyptian heritage, of be it the language, culture, or ritual, that they wanted to bring with them. And I think, was it Gordon B. Hinckley that said that? He said that when you come into our church, don't get rid of what you had, bring the good, and then we'll make it better, or something like that.
Yeah, and on top of that, like I'm saying, like imagine, okay, so you know that one of my good friends is a geologist, and he talks about dinosaurs a lot. And so one of the things he mentions about dinosaurs that we don't think about a lot is that the amount of creatures that actually get fossilized is incredibly small percentage, and then out of those, it's actually also self-selecting based on where you live. There's certain places that are much higher likelihood of having fossilization occur than other places. And so
Right.
you're basically self-selecting which species you even have a chance of seeing, which types of
Mm-hmm.
species, and then you're like out of those there's just a minute chance that they eventually get fossilized, and then there's a even just as small of a chance that those get discovered. And we're self-selecting also for bigger creatures as well, because it's a lot easier to find a 20-foot bone than one that's like an inch big. So
Right.
I guess my whole point though is that like we oftentimes forget that like durability or sustainability or the passing of information is almost as important as having the information. You have that information, but if you don't pass it down, if it's not conveyed, if it's not written in stone in the right place and the right time, we're not going to have it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's cool that they wrote so many things on papyrus. That doesn't help
Well,
us at all.
well, that's
Yeah.
why it's important though to use a language, use mediums that people actually use. And so like I don't know how it is in certain industries. I know in like music or in a lot of Reddit posts, there's like this there's this like desire to go down these rabbit holes on like every conceivable thing known to man. And the challenge is there's some really cool stuff out there that like, oh, we can uh I don't know, I'm trying to think like bake bread in a way that's better than we have ever baked bread before. Or
Reinvent the wheel, reinvent the baked bread wheel.
and there's I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with it. The challenge is like, okay, well that's awesome that like two people can do that, but how do you bring that culture or change, help pass that culture down and continue it? If it's truly so important that we bake that bread, or in our case, if we continue that religion, how do you pass it down, and what stays with people? And I hate to break it to people, but if you don't speak the language, there's a good chance you're going to lose whatever was in that language. So I think it made sense for quite a long time to put things in Egyptian, you know, just because it was used a lot.
Yeah, you're
But
absolutely right. And I think on top of that, um, like so you're talking about a lingua franca, but on top of that, like all these other places like Egyptian, this is actually something that I'm going to go into, and I've mentioned this before, but like based on what we know so far, sure there was like Minoan A and Minoan B. There were like some languages that seem to have been written down, some alphabets that seem to have been made, but what we know about is Egyptian, and then how it got
mhm.
changed into Phoenician, and then it got spread through the different. My brain doesn't know the right words, but into Arabic and Hebrew and those types of languages, and then it went
Right.
west. It went west to Greek and then Latin and those types of languages, and Cyrillic, of course, occurred. But that's the tree that we fall from. We fall from that tree, and so we know more about that. So I'm not saying there aren't other alphabets that were written down. I'm mostly just saying that this is what we know was written down, and we know it was written down at a certain time period. And so this is actually, once Marty jumps on, we're going to talk about. This is actually a strong segue into what I want to talk about. But what time did these things occur? Like we think that about 1,000 BC, there was some. First of all, Egyptian was way before that, but like from between 1,000 BC to like 700 BC, I think 600 BC, that's when it like transitioned to like proto Hebrew or Phoenician and other things, or Reformed Egyptian, however you want to phrase it, and I think that that's really interesting because we at least believe the Bible purports to have stories coming from well before that, And so that means that a lot of stuff, maybe if it was written down, it was written in papyrus. Maybe it wasn't written down well. Maybe it wasn't written down at all. Anyway, that's something I'm going to
Yeah.
jump into. But like, we're basing a lot based on things that like we're like, well, we actually don't even know when different things were written down. We don't know when things occurred. We know when the Septuagint occurred, but in our story, like our understanding of the story, we believe that there were brass plates that were written down and that were handed down from father to son or some other form of passing it down. And eventually it got taken by the Nephites. And if that occurred, that meant that there was like at least some uh, language. And they talk about it in the Book of Mormon how there was um, I'm trying to say this correctly. There were different moments when the language was transformed and not as pure as it had been, and so there were times when like maybe that pure language, kind of like you were talking about, there was no longer legible or helpful to the people who were living at that time. Like this is my understanding from the Book of Mormon that the Lamanites had basically no capacity to even understand the languages of the brass plates and stuff. Like I don't think that they had any way to even comprehend what their ancestors were trying to tell them from the dust, as it were. So
So the challenge. So I agree. I do have to say though, the Book of Mormon is not always clear about nights are for a long time, considering considering that you have like the Nephites who are actually like mostly people from like Zarahemla and other people, and then the Lamanites are kind of just like all the groups that are against the Nephites, you know. Not all of them. Like there's some like they do describe some like Nephites that have parted ways that do eventually become kind of part of the Lamanites, but they do kind of keep a separate title for a while or a separate name.
yeah,
So that's mentioned in the Book of Mormon is that like hey at some point some of the Nephites that broke off and threw away their god went to the Lamanites and were able to take power over them because they could read and write and they became their leaders, and so clearly that some of the groups they were dealing with had no they had a lot of capability for war, they had a lot of capability for a lot of things, but apparently passing along history was not one of them.
yeah, yeah. I don't know. I say we get going on the main subject because I don't know when Marty's going to get involved, and so I'd like to transition this over
Yeah,
to
go
over
for it.
to what I was thinking of. And I'm actually going to end the call real quick and try starting it in because it's being silly. I tried adding mom to the call, and it just says calling on repeat. So we'll see what's
Okay,
happening.
that's fine.
So give me a second, everyone, hold your horses. We'll be back after this short
All right.
break. Bye. Are you there? I don't know why the
Yeah,
video's not there. Your
there you
video's there
go.
now. Okay. My video's of course still not there. Mom's not answering, so we'll see what's happening. Let's double check the video for a second. That's my video. Oh my gosh. I'm sure it can hear you. Say something real quick.
Yo, 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 yo.
Yeah, they can hear you. Just, your video's not going right now because it's pulling up the wrong thing, which is always delightful.
I can see myself, so that's all that matters.
You, you consider that a success?
The video's working on my end.
Yeah, and it's kind of working. Like I pulled it to the group call. That's how to do it, isn't it? Window capture. Interesting. But it should be video capture. No, it's window capture. Okay. Interesting. I think I didn't know I had it on window capture. And if I can make you huge, but that doesn't do much. anyway, give me a second. I'm almost. I'm just being silly, basically. You're gonna be huge, Adams. Your head's gonna be way bigger than mine.
That's okay. I've always had a bloated head.
And mom said that she tried. Um, you know, doing things like this is always exciting. Um, did you? We're on a group call, at least so there's that. I just anyway. Okay. If she answers, she answers. If not, yeah, it says she's trying to call me. uh,
Oh, she's trying to call me now.
yeah, I think that there's complications. And when Marty jumps on, that will be the same thing. I'm positive. But we'll see. Yeah, it just shows. The problem on my end is it just shows it says calling, and then she said that she was able to hear us at one point. I think maybe she just clicked on the YouTube link. I don't know, but either way, um,
Telegram's kind of funny sometimes.
yeah, yeah.
It,
Okay, so oh, there we go. Look at that. Hey, how are you doing? We're about to transition to the next point, so I'm really glad you jumped on right now.
Well, I'm here for a little while.
Yeah, I need to make this smaller though. That was too big. Cause like so there's you can't see me. Can you see Adams though?
I can see Adams.
Fantastic. Um, for some reason,
Did you get your office put back together again, Adams?
partially it's a mess, but like it's the stuff is in the office, so it just needs to be
Okay.
organized.
Okay.
yeah. Just remember we are live, so let's keep the conversation. You can talk anything you want. Just be aware that it's going to the world.
Okay. Is our other guest coming on?
I don't know where Marty is, but I got you two.
Yep.
Um,
I'm good for about 10 minutes.
That's perfect. So we're gonna be talking just about a few small things that I think will be very interesting. I got both of you on the screen now, so you're on the screen, excitingly.
Okay.
Okay. So what Adams and I were talking about for a little while beforehand was we were talking about how Egypt actually played like an oversized role in the early history of the Bible and also in the New Testament and also in our scriptures. And it was so that I thought that was very interesting. But what I wanted to transition it to was a thought that I'm sure Adams has thought about this before, but I don't know if you have. So you can stop me and pause me at any time. But I want to set this as like the setting for us understanding the discussion we're about to have with Adam and Eve. So the question is, like I was saying, Adams, when were things written down and who wrote them down, right? It wasn't the first 5 books, of Moses, they were not written down by Moses, and they weren't written down, uh, like, we don't know when they were written down or by whom, but like at the very least they were not, like Deuteronomy wasn't written by Moses. There's a lot that wasn't written down. It was written much later. So the point is, if it wasn't written down, what form was it in? And let's go specifically to the old stories. Like, let's go to Adam and Eve. What form was that one in for at least a long period of time? What's your opinion on that,
No.
Adams?
I don't have a particularly strong opinion, because as smarter people have said, it's possible that the Adam and Eve story originated from another text, or it could have been an oral tradition.
Well, let me bring something
But
up, and it looks like
yeah, go for it.
I'm gonna add Marty to the call, because apparently he's available now, so that's awesome. And I'm gonna repeat this, the whole point that I was making. But let's do introductions around. So first of all, for anyone that's not watching, we got Mom, Adams, and then Marty will be joining, and Mom will be jumping off in a second. Sorry, once Marty gets on, I'm gonna have to double check some things. How did it work for you, Mom? What was the difficulties you were having?
Well, I was between my text and Telegram and going back and forth to see which one I could hop on with, and it ended up being my text.
Interesting.
That's possible.
Okay.
Whatever the link is, it suddenly came on and said, "Do I want to join?" And I said yes. I think it was my text. I don't know.
Okay. It should have been Telegram.
We'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, let's go over. We know the Adam and Eve story in Genesis. We know it in Moses. We know it in the Pearl of Great Price. But there's a few other versions of the Adam and Eve story that we don't talk about very much. So one of them's in Job, and the reason that these are interesting. Oh, Marty says he's ready for real this time, so let's try again, and then you'll be able to say hello to him, okay, Mom? So it'll be good.
Okay.
Let's hide that and make sure that ready for real means ready for real. Yeah, and the only difficulty that I'm having right now is I don't know if you know, Adams, but to change the... What's up,
Hi,
Marty?
Hey.
Adams, I don't know how to change the screen layout, because right now we have 4 people, but like I am taking up one corner, and as you can see, I'm not actually visible in that corner, so...
I don't know. I don't know if you can. Oh,
okay.
did we just lose Marty?
He just turned off his video for a second, it seems like.
Oh, okay.
So he'll jump back on.
I'm fumbling.
Yeah. So Marty, I'm gonna give you a short rundown of the conversation, and you could just listen while you're figuring things out. So what my point is that we know there's certain times, like for example the Septuagint, when the Bible was written down and actually translated to Greek. We know before that when Phoenician and Hebrew were actually getting invented, that around that point I'm sure that the Bible, or at least different parts of the Bible, were written down. We know that Moses and Abraham were very smart people. They probably wrote things down in Egyptian. But before that, what was written down actually? And we're going to be talking about Adam and Eve, so my focal point here is Adam and Eve. When was the Adam and Eve story first written down? And so I'd like to bring up Job, because there's a few versions of the Adam and Eve story that I'd like to go over, because the Genesis version isn't the only version that we have. We have a few others in the Bible, and they talk about them. So So let's go Job 15, 7 and 8. And this is actually very similar to DNC 120 or 119. I can't remember. Because you know how Job has been through all these crazy things. One of his buddies starts talking to him, a guy named Eliphaz. He starts talking to Job. And in verse 7, he says, "Art thou the first man that was born, Job? Job, is that you, the first man that was born? Or wast thou made before the hills? Hast thou heard the secret of God? And dost thou restrain wisdom to thyself?" There's a lot going on here, but anyone, like, we've talked about it enough, so we know when they say, "Art thou the first man that was born?" You could translate to say, "Art thou Adam? Was that you, Adam?" And when the second line, "Was thou made before the hills," kind of emphasizes that. The next line, "Hast thou heard the secret of God?" This is another little piece of Hebrew. This is bisod, basod. I don't know how to say it, but it's around the word sod, which has to do with the counsel of God. So, I don't want to dominate this conversation, but like, do you remember? Do you guys remember that when I talk about counsel, what I'm referencing? Adam's Marty.
Yeah.
You're talking about the divine counsel, right?
At the very least, I'm talking about the divine counsel. Yeah, at the very least. So Job's friend is implying that Adam and prophets in general probably were privy to the divine counsel, both in the pre-earth life and then also when trying to be prophets to the people. And then the last line, "Dost thou restrain wisdom to thyself?" He asks, do you have wisdom? What was it that Adam and Eve, this is something I'd like to bring up actually. So what was it that Adam and Eve were doing? There was the two trees. One was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and one was the tree of life. So the question is, dost thou restrain wisdom to thyself? Is that like a metaphor, or is that euphemistic for saying, how did you partake of do you have the knowledge of good and evil now? That's my opinion, at least. So, the reason I bring this up is because this version actually doesn't, like, it talks about things that the version in Genesis that we know doesn't talk about. The other version is in Ezekiel 28, and it's a lot longer, so we're not going to read the whole thing, but it's a metaphor. They're using the Adam and Eve story to talk about Tyre and Sidon, how they'll fall and be destroyed. And they talk about, let's just read verse 2 because it's super interesting. So, all right, verse 1 and 2. The word of the Lord came, this is Ezekiel 28, 1 and 2. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man. So once again, he's talking to Adam. Adam, hey, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas. Yet thou art a man, and not God. Though thou hast set thine heart as of God. So what is he saying? He's saying, you think you're acting like you're God, but you're a man. You're Adam. Adam has not reached godhood yet. In your progression as Adam, you have not reached godhood yet. You have not reached there. And
so David keeps on swapping between Adam and man when it says Adam in there. It's because the word Adam means man.
There's three different ways you could translate the word man in Hebrew, but in this one they are using the word Adam, Adamah. They're saying the word Adam as man. So I'm not gonna go too much more down there, but like verse 13, like thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God, every precious stone, and they talk about like the treasures of Eden, and they talk about other things, and so once again, this isn't my point, isn't to analyze this. My point is actually to talk about. I kind of want to bring up, what is it that which media has received the most variations in all of media? Which story has received the most variations in all of media? And I think that if I were to put that out there, you guys would say, I bet Shakespeare, something by Shakespeare, right? Like The Lion King is Shakespeare. Every movie that you guys see is actually just a variation of a Shakespeare play, right? Nod, yes, no, more
They
like
say that about like Mozart music, where like
everything's
every
just a
music
variation of
is
Mozart.
a variation of a Mozart. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that everything's a variation of a Shakespeare play. And I think that what we're looking at here is we're looking at the story of Adam and Eve, and we're, since it's written down to us, it's this hard delineated thing. But the prophets and the people spoken that back then were doing they were doing the Lion King with Adam and Eve. They were taking this Shakespeare play of the story of Adam and Eve, and they were presenting it in different ways. They were presenting it to the Tyre and Sidon. They were presenting it to Job, and they were saying, "See how this relates exactly to you." And the point, and does that make sense to you guys, more or less, the idea at least? Because I'm gonna throw one more thing out there if that idea makes sense. Okay, the point is that the story we have of the version of Adam and Eve is not the original version either. That is a version that the Deuteronomists used to convince the people, look, this is why when like we got destroyed and our temple got destroyed, like this is why we were deserving of it, basically. Like there's the temple that got destroyed and we weren't doing all the things that Deuteronomy said, but also look at this, we already had sin in us, we were already evil. So this is the Deuteronomist version, or maybe not the Deuteronomist version, but some version like that of people commentarying on their destruction. And so why is it that in the Pearl of Great Price, or my favorite version of the Adam and Eve story, 2 Nephi 2, when Lehi talks about Adam and Eve, why he talks about it in such glowing lights. He says, you know, like, look what Eve did. Adam fell that men might be. He doesn't say, you know, like, look at this great horror that you've done. On dust you will crawl. Like, or what are some of the curses that
David's bringing that up is because a lot of religions view the fall of Adam and Eve as like the downfall of humanity. Like, oh, Eve partook of the fruit, and therefore we have sin in the world, and it's kind of all their fault that all this pain and destruction is in the world. Whereas Lehi in the Book of Mormon
and the Pearl of Great Price as well,
and the Pearl of Great Price kind of take that story and they're like, no, that's not the story of Adam and Eve. The story of Adam and Eve is that of a happy story, that, you know, there's many happy things involved. So what David's saying is that somewhere along the way, someone took the story of Adam and Eve, used it or changed it to some degree, and then future generations after that kind of took it and put a dark tone on it.
That's my hypothesis. My hypothesis,
that's the hypothesis,
is that it's a happy story, but it was retold in the instance that we have to do an analysis or give Israel and Judah a reason for their downfall by saying, hey, it's not really your fault. You know, we were all born evil. And I don't know how many Jews you guys know, but they take this story to heart. They take the Adam and Eve story to heart. Like they act like, oh, you know, we were always going to be eating dirt. That's who we are. That's just the way of life. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you look at it and you see the Adam and Eve story and you realize that this is not I'm not going to say the original version, but this is a version that's meant to tell a different story, you'll probably see it in a different light. And that's my goal today. So you'll see it in the light where you'll be like, huh, they're trying to make a commentary on the fallibility of man and the fickleness of life. While what is Lehi's main commentary on Adam and Eve story? Anyone can jump in if they have an opinion. 2 Nephi 2 is where he talks about it the most. What's his main point? He talks about the opposites in all things. That's where he really goes into it. And then he talks about how it was a necessary thing. Like these are all necessary steps, but he doesn't. He mostly talks about like how it's like this is part of the plan. Like these are all parts of the plan, and his is an analysis as well. So remember, like when we read Lehi, because he's saying it, because it's presented like that, we don't have any questions. We know that it's Lehi's analysis talking about it, but we don't think
But
about it. Mm-hmm.
He was influenced by the teachings of the Jews, so something happened to enlighten him to take a right turn about the tenor of that whole.
That's a beautiful point. I think the hypothesis there would be that the brass plates did not contain the exact same stuff as the five what are they called, mosaic books that we have now.
Well, that's kind of the whole point of the Book of Mormon, is that, I mean, the whole idea was that, hey, Lehi tried to bring enlightened understanding of Jesus Christ, of the mysteries of God, to the Jews, to bring them towards repentance, and they rejected him. And they rejected Christ. They rejected the idea that there would be the Son of God would come down and save them, which to all the Nephites was a hopeful thing. It was a hopeful thing that their Savior would come and save them. So I think you're right, Mom. But I think it's their entire culture. The Nephite culture is that of even though they are Jews, being separate from whatever culture was happening during the time of Nephi. You know, Nephi condemned them, saying, it's like, hey, you want to kill my father like you killed the prophets of old, the ones that preached repentance and preached the Son of God. And so you're right, Mom. There is Lehi did take a right turn from a lot of Jews, but there were still people in the time of Christ that when they heard Christ, they recognized him as the Redeemer.
Yep.
So it wasn't necessarily
isn't that
everybody.
An interesting
but...
one? That's one that we need to dive into another time. But like, what is it that Christ did that, or better yet, what did the people at Christ's time know? What did they know and believe? So when they saw Christ, they said, "Hey, this is the Redeemer." Because we can explain away so much. We're so good at explaining things away. So I'd like to jump into that some other time. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about Adam and Eve, and I'd actually like to look at it through Lehi's lens, which is that for all the yeah, go for it.
I'm heading out.
Okay.
While you're doing your segue.
Okay.
I love you. That was really delightful.
Thank you so much for joining.
Man. Yep. Adios.
Good seeing ya.
What I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about how there's Lehi believed in opposites in all things, basically, and I think that when we read the Genesis story, I think we need to read it when we read the Adam and Eve story. We need to read it more with those thoughts. So that's kind of what I wanted to jump into, but I wanted to start it with the at least for me, it was mind blowing of like, wait a second, like if Adam and Eve, if like, so I don't know if that hit you guys as it hit me, but like if this story is not the original story, this is like an a polemic is one of the words used. If this is like an analysis, like used by someone else to tell the like especially Israel or Judah at that time, like a specific aspect of that story, then it makes a lot more sense to me, or at least it tells me something different. So anyway,
well,
yeah.
So a couple things. I don't know if this is jumping the gun, but because when I heard about that, I kind of was thinking about it, and I was thinking about, okay, well, what's missing from the story then, or what is inherently changed?
Yeah, we could talk about that. And, so I don't mind going into this.
Sure.
So yeah, no, go for it. Tell me your thoughts.
Well, I feel like there's a couple things. One, there's a strong lack of telling what the cherubim are. Like there's like random things that are assumed that the reader would know. So if this, so it can't be the first story if there's stories that people that read it would already know and understand the lingo and be like, oh, okay, I know what those things are. Like, so clearly it's being based off this.
Did you ever read
understanding?
Did you ever read that? It was an Orson Scott Card thing that he wrote in like 1990 or something. Did you ever read that about the Book of Mormon? And did you send that to me, Marty, or is that?
Is that about his idea about the Mulekites?
No,
or?
well, no. I think he mentions that there. It's
Okay.
super interesting though, basically, because he talks about how the Book of Mormon, and I'm gonna try bringing it back, Adams, as quickly as I can, so we don't jump too far.
Yeah,
off.
go for it.
But the Book of Mormon, if it was written by someone who was making things up, i.e., someone who was a science fiction writer like Orson Scott Card, and I can shoot you the link if you want, Marty. But the point is, like, what are things that someone who's making something up does, and what are things that someone who is just telling a story does? Someone who's just telling a story, kind of like Adams points out, is going to make assumptions that the people who know what the context of the story is and what's going on, they're not going to describe it, because that's. But if this is the first time the story's ever been told, or if you're writing it down and you're trying to include as much information as you can, you're going to describe everything to an absurd detail. And this is actually, not to pull you too far off course, Adams, but my belief is that one thing that's missing is that this wasn't written down first. My belief is that it was stage play the whole way, up until it was written down because it was a polemic. You can write down a polemic, you're not going to write down a temple ceremony. There's different things. So if someone's writing something to like talk about like how evil well, not how evil, but like how like Adam and Eve making that decision basically led to the fact that eventually you're going to get destroyed by the Babylonians, that's fine to write down, but you're not going to write down a temple ceremony and then propagate it. So that's my opinion. But keep going, Adams, with your or Marty, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna. Oh, go ahead, Adams.
Adams, pause for a second. We can't hear you. Marty, you go.
Well, kind of going along with that, I was going to say, I mean, it explains a lot about like the opening chapters of First Nephi, where you're like, this was clearly written under the assumption that people would already have a background knowledge about this story. Because he says, because like for example, when they introduce Laban, it's like, oh yeah, you gotta go back to Jerusalem and get the plates from Laban. I'm like, who the heck is Laban? Like, just it's just like plainly stated. There's zero explanation. Like, there's no background given, and so like it's very clear that when Nephi, at least when he started making his record on the small plates, he it was very clearly not intended for us at first, at the bare minimum.
And there's a funny contrast to that with anything that Mormon or Moroni say, because when they say it, they give the exposition, they talk about what's going on. But when Nephi's doing it, he's like, yeah, I gotta go to Laban. Yeah, no, great point.
Yeah, I mean, it's just shows that his intended audience, which personally I think was probably like the kind of the temple priests most likely. Like, he's assuming like, yeah, you guys will already have a working knowledge of this history and the story I'm telling you. I'm giving you a you know kind of condensed but like specifically told kind of story, to explain how we got here, or whatever it may have originally been.
Yeah, I love it. And Adams, it looks like you're back now. You were just it seemed like you were going, like the Wi-Fi or something was going through problems.
Oh, okay.
So
that's fine.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say is a couple things that I feel like is kind of missing from the Garden of Eden story, and that Lehi hits upon in a way that really brings the story together, is this when David is talking about the opposites. Well, kind of from the get-go, they have like the night and the day. They have man and woman. They have the Redeemer and Satan. They have the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Like, I don't.
Can I jump in?
They're all. Yeah, go for it.
They're like, all these characters are referenced, but they're not like ever set up. Like, and I think there's more opposites that are referenced, but because they're not set up, because no one says, and let me show you the stage, here's this person, this person, like there's never a description of the stage, like you don't realize that there's opposites and all those things. But yeah, keep going.
And one of my personal belief is that is kind of misses is that the necessity for the opposition is lacking there, even though it's all kind of set up in a way that it should be there. And Lehi really drives the nail home, the idea that, hey, man and woman need to be together. You know, knowledge of good and evil needs to be together. You know, mortality and death, life and death need to be together. You know, those things are needed for a greater good that comes afterward. And it appears that the story is set up for all that, but in the Genesis version, it's like they completely ignore it, even though they have all the basis points for it being set up there. So it understanding that this might be a different telling of a story, at least helps me understand better where Lehi is coming from, and maybe some of the key points that a lot of people before this version took away from the story. And the last thing I wanted to mention is they always say that Eden is kind of a temple, but they kind of lack the return to the temple. In all the temple stories, there's a leaving of the temple, and there's always a return to the temple.
It's an eternal round.
Yeah. And I know some people have tried to draw that conclusion in like, oh, in the Bible at the beginning and the end, they kind of return, or
in the beginning there's a tree and it ends with a tree and stuff like that.
Yeah. The original story wasn't written knowing the end of the Bible. So like, I guess what I'm getting at is that the original story would have had that ending there.
I think that's my main point, actually. That's my main point, which is that the story that's being told is of the fall. It's of Adam and Eve's failures. It's of the failure of, and how that correlates with all of like the Babylonians crushing them and the exile. Like, that's what it is. Like, if you stop the story halfway through, it's a disappointing failure. If you don't come back to the temple, I actually said this to Dad. I was talking to him and I said, well, the Adam and Eve story is a temple story. Like, they get kicked out of the Garden of Eden and they return to the Garden of Eden. And he's like, wait, you're equating the Garden of Eden with the temple? And I said, yeah. And like, there's a why is my brain not working? Going up, what's that called, Adam? So there's
ascension.
It's an ascension story, yeah. And he's like, but he has a good point, which is that it doesn't actually talk about the ascension, and so you kind of have to imply it. You don't even know it's a temple. Like, I was actually going to go into some of the stuff here, because one of the things that I had brought up, I was in Sunday school, and someone asked about the rivers, and I'm not going to go over every part of the Adam and Eve story, because if you haven't heard it or you haven't read it, that's not for us. You can read Genesis 2 and do it, but there's 4 rivers, and well, first of all, they plant a garden eastward in Eden, and it's there's a garden, it's paradise. By the way, that's another thing. When you read the word paradise, realize they're referencing the garden, so they reference it a few times in the New Testament as paradise, but the Lord planted a garden eastward in Eden, and that's an eastward facing temple. That's what that is. And then as it goes on, there's a river that went out of Eden that was parted and came into 4 heads. And there's 4 different parts. And the thing that someone asked about, like, the 4 rivers, and I was in my head thinking about like Genesis 1 when I answered the question, because anytime you talk about the number 4 in the Bible, or you talk about the cardinal directions, they're all representative of Earth. And so I think in some ways Eden is representative of Earth, but in other ways it's also representative of the temple. So I don't mean to be galumphing on and on.
Well, also the not only is the tree found in the temple, you know, and they would have had the menorah, they would have had the trees at the beginning of the tabernacle. The belief is that the temple in Jerusalem had the well of souls would potentially have water that would come from it.
Let me
There's
add what
many
you said though. Correct what you said. You said the trees at the beginning. There were pillars outside the front of the temple
pillars. Yes,
that
sorry,
were representative that were representative of
represented the
trees.
tree.
Yeah, keep going though. Yeah. So there was a well of
Yeah.
souls that everyone in Jerusalem knew about, which is in all the visions of all the prophets, was in every single temple vision. There was a river coming out of the temple in every single temple vision.
So when you go through like the vision of Lehi and Nephi, there's a river that comes from the tree. You know, these are temple images in every visionary's vision. Visionary's visions. That sounds redundant. And so I agree with David. Like, you know, it's definitely a temple, and in all the other stories, it's about how to like get back. You know, you come from here. You the story is you leave a high place, you travel into the world, and then you return to a high place. You leave the temple, you enter the world, and then and that journey is necessary. Like, and I think that's one of the challenges of this story is that it makes it sound like it's unnecessary and kind of like what's the word? Like your punishment, like your punishment, and it was unnecessary that you had to be in this world. Whereas
it was
Lehi,
was inadvertent, or it was outright a mistake, and so that's the unnecessary part you're talking about, right? And then
yeah.
everything that we experience in this world is also a punishment, is the second part you're saying, right? Like all the things we have to go through, the travails.
Yeah. Whereas Lehi is like, and the other Book of Mormon prophets, they recognize the challenges in this life, but they're like, hey, this is all for our greater good, even though it might be challenging, because in the end, a savior will redeem us. So as long as we get through this life, regardless of the challenges that we face, and, you know, people get killed. You know, Alma and Amulek watched innocent women and children burn. Like great challenges happen in this life, but the end of the story is supposed to be the same, that Christ redeems us all, that we can return to the presence of God.
Marty, I'd like to hear your opinion, because I don't know if you ever chimed in on that. Do you see evidence that Genesis 2 is that the Garden of Eden is a temple, and then the temple narrative? And yeah, what's your opinion on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what I centered my my temple prep lesson around today. Was like, I mean, I think part of it is that, you know, in modern times, like we get it, we kind of have the default assumption in our heads that, you know, the only place that temple ordinances can happen is in a physical temple, and we miss out on the fact that, hey, you know, yes, that's nice to have the building. It's nice to have even a tabernacle tent that you can work with, but sometimes they didn't have that, and you just had to work with whatever was on hand. And so that's how you get back to the, you know, the ancient symbol of like the temple being, not the temple, the, you know, the mountain being the holy place where you ascend, make a literal ascent up to meet God, you know, where heaven and earth meets. And yeah, I mean, it just makes perfect sense, because then everything about the temple makes so much more sense as, you know, reversing the effects of the fall and saying, okay, this is how you know, it teaches us that the point of the temple is to teach us how to become the kind of people that can return to God's presence and want to be in his presence.
So David, I have a wild thought. If, and this is a big if, and there's many ifs. So if it's true that this originates from an oral tradition of some sort,
By the way, I didn't say oral tradition. I specifically said something
another
non-written, but
version,
I think acted out. I think it was
acted out. Could it not be very possible that the names were different as well?
Absolutely. So So I think that goes everything from um, the names of the rivers. Probably, I don't think they matter very much. I think it's more specific to whoever
Yeah.
was writing it at the time. But I I don't really know. Like I'm being very specific to chapter 2, to the actual creation story. I don't really want to comment on that as much right now. But if that's what you're
Well,
referencing,
the reason why I bring it up is because in a lot of these stories, the name given to the person is supposed to represent like their what's going to happen to them in during the rest of the story. Like, so their titles, um
yeah,
like you know who you're rooting for in the Book of Mormon. It's the Nephites.
the guy
You
whose name
know,
literally means good and beautiful.
yes. So in a lot of the Old Testament names, the names kind of indicate who, how they're connected to God, or what kind of challenges they would face. And the whole point is that if you're going to tell these orally to people, if you're going to act these out to people so that they can understand and hear the stories, you want names that they would attribute and recognize with your characters in the simplest of ways so that they can remember it as the story progresses.
I agree.
So
So
I
continue.
guess
Yeah, go to the and thus, or the
my
yeah,
my
therefore.
my thought is that it could be really possible that Adam and Eve's names are changed based, or have been changed in the past based on what the person writing it or acting it is wanting to convey about the person, what kind of attribute. And I guess the reason why I'm bringing that up is because there's names that have been kind of like briefly mentioned in scripture or forgotten completely that we know nothing about. And I'm wondering if they're more connected with the story of Adam and Eve than we realize, just because no one knows that connection anymore or something. I don't know.
If you give an example, like I agree with what you're saying, but I have a really strong point to make along with it. So give an example, and I'd like to make my point.
I don't have any good examples because otherwise I feel like I'd be able to make connections. But I'll give you the example of like one where like the name Melchizedek is thrown around, and that has a lot of crazy implications, that name, but we don't know anything about the story. But apparently people did. It was like a common, something about it was common enough that people understood it. And and I don't know, it was just a thought, crazy thought. Stories could potentially get merged, stories, name swaps, and then you suddenly lose.
So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I'd like to make a certain point.
It's just a hypothesis.
I'd like to make 2 points. One is the most obvious one is that we actually know what they did with the name, or at least a group of people who used this story when they translated the story into other languages. They changed the name of Eve to Zoe, which was the same thing but in Greek. It meant living. So they thought that Eve's name was not just the sound of Eve, but it was the meaning of the name, just like you're saying. So I agree with you there, but they were also adamant about keeping that meaning very strongly attached, instead of just coming up with like some Greek person's name who they thought was most representative of all Greek people or something. There was a very important connection with living. The next thing I would like to say is, did my brain just lose it? Yeah, I lost it. I had another really good point. It's gone. If it comes back, I'll jump in. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you. I just also think that the story that they're trying to say is so important that if they were telling specific subsets of the stories, kind of like, which is my argument, that they're trying to take that story and apply it in different scenarios, they probably would actually still keep the name, because Adam is all of us. Like you can't tell the story and then not apply it to ourselves. Like it can't be, it has to be Adam still.
Well, so the reason why I bring that up is because in the full temple ascension story, there's a crowning and enthronement. And as far as I know, Adam is not a throne name.
That's a really good point. And oh, actually, I remember my other point. So that's actually kind of what you're saying. My point is that um, we we know, or at least my opinion is that a lot of the things we learn in the temple actually helped predict Christ's coming and predict when it was going on. Like Nephi said, we know from Revelation that Christ will appear 600 years from this time or something like that. And the question is like, how did he know that? And I think it was because like the name, and his name will be Jesus Christ. I think that his name and I think Mary's name, I think other people's names were actually included in the ceremony in ways that were helpful. That helped people understand. Let me give an example of one that maybe you don't realize, but Mary is Miriam, right? And it's associated with the word myrrh, which is why is it named myrrh? Because it's bitter. So tell me what waters does Lehi know about? Lehi knows about bitter waters. He knows about waters. Well, Nephi said there's this vision that Lehi had. He didn't realize that the waters were not pretty. They were messed up, or in other words, bitter. They weren't good for drinking. So I think the name Mary literally is in that vision. That's my argument, and I think that's true with other things going on in the story. And so I think that there could be throne names, and I think that clearly we have a strong belief that after we go through these things we'll be given other names. After going through the temple, we'll be given names. So I agree with you there. Not to jump too far into things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So did my explanation of Mary make enough sense? I don't know if I said that very well.
It made sense to me.
Okay. Yeah. So I think
that's a challenge. That's a challenge as we get more and more separated from the culture where these stories came from and the language. Like what if in 1,000 years we don't realize that like seawater is salty and you have like a name that's like, man, that salty water there, and you're like, oh, he's talking about the ocean,
Very true. Yeah, very true.
We're just separated. I guess the best example we have for today is like very few people today have any experience with killing and slaughtering farm animals for food. Like no experience whatsoever.
And that part of the story is inherent and necessary to understanding the sacrifice, both in the Old Testament and then all the way through to the New Testament.
So like one thing that was made known to me from smarter people, I don't remember their names though, is that like in ancient times, like they reminded us like you didn't have a lot of animals, you just had a few. So killing one of your animals was kind of like a big deal. Like it was your animal, it was kind of part of your family in a way. Like it was a sacrifice. Like, and we use the word sacrifice like, oh, I sacrificed, a couple hours to go to church on Sunday. What a great sacrifice. No, this is like you're sacrificing an integral part of your family for some sustenance, like it's just not on the same level, I think, as to how we use it. I'm not saying that people don't make tremendous sacrifices today, but like connecting that with food that you're going to need to survive and the animal that you helped raise and grow until you could kill it. We just don't have that experience. So
another example I'd like to give is actually our connection with just what I was talking about now with bitter water and sweet water. In English, we often call it fresh water and salt water.
Fresh water, yeah.
But in like Spanish, at least, they sometimes just call it agua dulce, like just like sweet water. And in my mind, that's because they come from a culture and a climate that was like water is the most important thing. So when you're thirsty and you're dying of dehydration and you have water, it is if it's good water to drink and it's sweet water, it is so good. It's not just it's life-giving, it's all important. While nowadays, like, you know, someone's like, I was dying of thirst and then I had a Coke. If you gave a Coke back to someone back in the day when they were dying of thirst or dehydration, they would be like, get this out of here. I need some sweet water. And we just don't understand the difference. We live in such a sugaried, water is mundane. Water's the we even use the word vanilla to describe something that's like normal and not exciting, even though vanilla is one
Even
of
though vanilla is like crazy,
the coolest spice
crazy,
ever.
yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. I'd like to talk more about the temple of it. Like, so I'd like to point out a few things. Like, I'd like to point out that like the rivers all flowed away from the garden, meaning that the garden was elevated. So like as Marty was saying, that the garden was on a mountain. Because this is stuff that's going to become important all throughout the rest of the Bible. I'd like to mention what we talked about earlier with verse 15, that the Lord took man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it, which are verbs that are associated with the priests and with the and even the put him in. The translation could be better said as he tabernacled man into the Garden of Eden to dress it and keep it, and then he used the verbs of the Levites. And then my other point, like I was bringing up to Adams, and that Adam said so eloquently, is that there's just opposites everywhere. Like we talk about in chapter 3. I'd love to talk about, like, there's the aprons, there's like what they wore, there's the light. Marty, did you talk about in your script or temple prep about the coats of skins? Do you know that one?
We didn't dive into it like that. We didn't get to the nitty gritty that much. It was kind of more bigger picture of, the garden being the fall and the temple being the way back.
When you only have so much time, right? That's why it's incumbent on people to do their own work. So in verse, let's see, chapter 3, verse 21. This is after they were found naked and after everything. Unto Adam also and his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins. And this is a famous one because coats of skins is skins sounds in Hebrew. It sounds like the word for light. So when you say it, it sounds like you're saying they made coats of light. And so it's just a very like it's very well commented on because people know, like it's been, oh, why is he saying coats of light? That's an interesting thing. And they're like, no,
So
we swear it's coats of skins.
Knowing that, David, I feel like I grew up in all the paintings and stuff portrayed like Adam and Eve wandering around out of the garden, like kind of shabby.
Post garden? You mean in the
post garden?
Yeah.
As they're leaving the garden, they're like in like these like shabby like skin, like modern-esque looking skin, and it's like, okay, if God made them, what's the chances that he made it bad? What, like, wouldn't whatever God touched just be like holy and sanctified? So if God made the coats of skins for Adam and Eve, wouldn't they inherently be godly?
Yeah. And also I think the reason is because like we try to take something that like we can't imagine as godly, like we can't imagine godliness, and we just try to like not make it worldly but make it understandable. And we're sitting there thinking like, man, if I had to make a garden and work a garden and go hunt just to be able to eat breakfast and lunch, like what would I look like? Well, I don't think I'd look clean and pretty. That's my analysis of it.
But symbolically though, it's beautiful, the idea that as Adam and Eve are preparing to enter a challenging trials, that one of the things that God gives them is a protective skins to cover their nakedness, like a holy garment. Like that story, that concept completes it with all other temple and holy narratives of its day and of all past. Like, isn't that the most classic story of all stories? The
Getting
idea
the
that,
armor.
hey,
Yeah.
getting the armor of God or getting the sword of God, and then they send you on your trial. Like this makes so much more sense than God making them like some shabby clothes and like, all right, get out of here, kick, shoo. You know, you're
Yeah.
kicked out.
I'd like to continue real quick, because on top of that, like, what does he talk about afterwards? He says, actually, it's right before that, so it's 19 and 20. He says, "In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread till thou return unto the ground, because dust to dust, whatever." And then also, let me see. In verse 16, I will greatly multiply thy sorrow and thy conception, blah, 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 and sorrow thou shalt bring children. If we take this and realize that, hey, it's an analysis, or it's a polemic against like the wickedness of Judah, and instead say, what probably was it saying? Like, imagine it the opposite, not the opposite way, but imagine this put in a positive way. So verse 16, well, like, let's say like, hey, we gave them some armor, you know, like you were saying, Adam. So we gave them God's armor, and then he says unto the woman, by the way, now you're going to have the chance to procreate, to have kids, to do the thing, which, by the way, is the whole point of the temple, you know, with a threshing floor. But he says, you know, like this is a blessing. Like, if said other ways, I'm not saying this very well right now, I'm not phrasing it correctly, but like, imagine saying to like someone like, hey, you're going to have a lot of kids and a lot of grandkids, and they're all going to love you. That's what this could be said as. And then the other one.
So change the order, David.
Yeah.
Change the order of when that is told to Eve to when they are crowned as king and queen. If you're a king and queen and then you're told to have children, what is that? That's a totally different idea than like, oh, you poor, rotten, miserable people, you're going to have kids and be sad and depressed. No, a king and a queen having children, an heir to the throne, is like a holy event almost.
Yeah, they're crowned king and queen. They're given the armor, they're given the coronation, they're given everything, and then they're saying, and by the way, you'll have a long and illustrious line. And what do they say to Adam? They say, you're going to have to work for it, but you're going to have food, and your people will not want. Like, I think that's what's being said. So the reason I'm bringing this up this way, I'm not saying it very well. In the temple, there's a lot of blessings and cursings, and especially in the old temple. In Deuteronomy, they talk about it a lot, but even like Jacob says it to his people. Like, if you do what you promise to do in the temple, you'll have a lot of kids, you'll live, you'll prosper in the land. But if you don't, you'll be cut off from the land, like super hard, and you'll be cut off from the Lord, and you won't prosper. And so these are like just these are an inverse of the promises in the temple. That's my argument.
Yeah, there's definitely, like, as I'm going through this, like, all these feel like they've been moved out of order, and then I don't know, man. It's changing my understanding of the Garden of Eden as we go through this, because it makes so much more sense if it was like it connects better with the Book of Mormon. It connects better with what we know from the restored gospel about Adam and Eve. If these are not sad, depressing stories, these are like, hey, you're gonna, and what does God say? And this is what's so funny about it. God's like, oh, the man has become one of us in verse 22 to know good and evil. Dude, isn't that like the most amazing thing for God to be like, well, he's kind of like us now. That's not a depressing thing.
Isn't this like an intonation thing? Like look at him, he's become like one of us, and like, it's fantastic. But they wrote, you know, like, enough people have like intoned it like negative, like, oh no, he's become like one of us. We got to make it so he doesn't live forever. He's got to die. It's like
we got to kill him off. What a if he lives forever, he's just going to be a sad, depressed, terrible. I think Lehi does a very good job at kind of reshaping. I wouldn't be surprised if this is what Lehi was kind of growing up with, this version of the story, because at least aspects of it, because he seems to recognize the tone and kind of hit back on it, even though he understands different ideas of the story.
Yeah, well, that's my
I
argument.
don't know if that made
No, that's my
sense. I don't know if that
argument
made
that
sense.
like the Assyrians or the Babylonians or like during the exile or whatever, they uh the the Jews tried coming up with arguments to themselves about why they were destroyed as a people, why their temple was destroyed, and so they came up with arguments, and I think that's one of the arguments that's like all throughout the Bible is them trying to say, well, of course, this happened to us because of this, and so anyway. I think we've hammered that point enough, but I really like what you were saying, Adams, about just like if we look at it through these lenses, then we can see like the positive of Lehi, and we can see like him like I'm not contrasting it, but like almost directly. Like, isn't it funny that everything that Lehi did like was such like so like I what was the argument when Joseph Smith like was his time, like people were like, man, Joseph Smith, you just somehow came up with a book that seemed to like go against, I don't know if it was Protestantism or what, like you somehow were like talking about the arguments of Protestantism of your day with child baptism and stuff like that, but like Lehi really straight up crushes it out of the water, where you're like, well, if you put it back in like the year 600, this seems to be exactly what Lehi would have been dealing with, like all of these things. So I agree with your point there, Adams. Yeah. Anyway, I don't have too much more. Like, there's a million more things I want to say. Like, um, just like I'd love to talk about the serpent more and the aprons and their eyes being opened and like the shame. But we've already been going for a while, so I don't know. Marty, do you have anything you want to talk about?
Mm, I mean, it's kind of a bigger picture approach that we kind of, it's been in the background of everything we've been talking about. Is that like too often when we think about people who lived in older times, we tend to kind of flatten them, try to make them like very one dimensional, simple, like this is how things were for them and that was it. But if there's anything that we should be learning, especially from like biblical scholarship, Dead Sea Scrolls, things like that, is that we should be assuming complexity with with any nation and religion. Like it's kind of like if aliens came down and said, okay, like I want you to explain American Christianity to me, and you're like, which one? Like there's how many Protestant denominations, Catholicism, Orthodox, Restoration, like. And I think the same thing applies, back to ancient Israel. I think that there were a lot of I mean, whatever term you want to use, like different traditions, different perspectives on God, things like that. And it's just we always have to ask ourselves, like, okay, like with the Bible that we have, the Old Testament that we have, which one did we get, like with any of these?
I
And
appreciate you
if we
bringing it back to that, by the way, because I feel like I have to keep reminding people that I'm talking to that I'm like, I think this is testimony building, not testimony destroying. That us understanding like what's going on in the Bible and the fact that there were a million real people living real lives back
Mhm.
then and going through the same struggles we're going through, and the fact that we have some people who have written down some things and other people who have written down other things, it doesn't hurt us. Instead, it helps us realize that like God is reaching out to all of us, even the people who've written down
Mhm.
the incorrect things. He's constantly reaching out to all of us. So anyway, I
Mhm.
appreciate that you brought it back to that, Marty. You can keep going. I just wanted to introduce my
Mhm.
agreement and approval.
Yeah. Well, I think it just it's helpful to I feel like it's like you're saying, like it's helpful for all of us to understand that you know, even like when we were within like, like under the roof of a single church, I mean, think about all the theological differences that there are with people. I mean, if you hop on TikTok or you hop on X, you'll see, if you're able to find them, you'll find raging debates over, very like tiny points of doctrine or scripture and interpretations of it. And that's fine. It's just, you know, like where is the focus at, and like what are you trying to get out of it? Like I think about how I don't think it's this coming week, but for Come Follow Me, but the week after is about the story, Noah and the ark. And it's one of those, I'm like, guys, I don't honestly, that whether or not the Noah and the ark was like, like a local memory from like centuries before, if it was appropriated from another people, or if there was like a universal flood over the whole world, I honestly do not care. It does not matter to me, like how historical the flood story is. For me, it's more about, okay, what can I learn about it? And for me, looking at the ark as a symbol of the temple and the covenants made there, and how the flood is, the chaos of life that we all have to deal with. And the fact is we all have floods coming for us at any given time. Like maybe you're in the middle of a flood right now, maybe you're recovering from one, but there's another one coming, guaranteed. And that the best way to ride out that flood is the temple and our covenants with God. Like for me, that's the most important thing about that story, not getting hung up on this kind of a post enlightenment view of reality that we have to interpret everything as historical, when that's not necessarily the way that it was originally written or intended for the people.
I'd like to add my opinion on this, since we haven't talked about it at all, and then we can actually talk about it and study it over the next few weeks, because I haven't studied Noah as much as I need to. But my opinion is that it is exactly what I was talking about here, that it's a polemic about the temple as well. So I think that it's a story, because I think another version of the temple story is Genesis 1, which is the creation, which is all about tohu wabohu, with the chaos, like you were saying, the water, the chaos, and defeating that chaos. And so there's some sort of 40-day long struggle or fast, like you're saying, and then he's able to defeat the chaos, and he's able to have the same thing as Adam and Eve. He's promised that he'll have lots of children, and there's even something about like clothing as well there that kind of gets a little confusing. But I think it's the same story. It's just it's someone else's saying of it. So anyway, I agree with your point, which is that like we're not here to discuss the accuracy or inaccuracy of the flood. That's not what the point is. Like that's not going to help us anytime soon. Like we're like if we know the flood occurred or didn't occur, or that Noah did that on the flood, like that's not going to help us anytime soon, knowing that or not knowing that. So anyway, I love that. Great point. Great point. And I bet that helped you a lot in your temple prep class today, talking to people, because you're like, we got Adam and Eve, but remember, we're trying to get back to God. Me, you, everyone here, we're trying to get back to God. You getting angry about like, I don't know what, like the serpent, or like if Adam shouldn't have accepted the fruit from Eve, or like who to blame. Like finding blame is not the point. I think that's the point of what the Jews were trying to do, is they were trying to assign blame. And I think that's why they wrote the story as is, because I think they were trying to give blame to someone other than themselves. But I don't think that I don't think that's the point. Yeah.
Well,
I also like blaming the Jews. I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Just
joking. A certain corner of X that will welcome
guys,
you with
whoa,
open
calm
arms.
down.
Well, it's just
well, isn't that the whole lesson of like the Book of Mormon, and a lot of the underlying tones of the Bible is that God gives us commandments, or he gives us an idea. We try to keep our covenants to the best of our abilities, but regardless of the outcome, in the next life, Christ will come and redeem us. And I think that's what Nephi and Moroni and all those prophets lived for. They're like, hey, Mormon and Moroni were like, we're the last of our people. We're being hunted down to killed. It's not, a great situation to be in. But you know what? I've seen God, I've seen Christ, and that's what I look forward to. It's not what's happening now. I'm going to just do my work here as I can. And I think that's the best thing you can take away from all of the scripture is that we'll be obedient until the end. And then Christ will come and pick up ourselves afterward.
I agree with you, but also that means that if that's the only story we're getting from the scriptures, that's why we need to go to the temple, just like Adam and Eve, because we need that ascent. We need to experience it for ourselves. We can't just look upon it. Like if Nephi didn't have the temple, like I'm just finishing the story of what you're saying. If Nephi didn't have the temple, then how disappointing and sad would it be if he found out that like in 1,000 years all his progeny would be wiped out by people that literally hate him?
Well, you have to remember is how did he receive commandments from God? He didn't receive commandments from God to go to the promised land by listening to the Jews or listening to the scriptures. It was he went to the temple and he was told and commanded to go build a ship that could cross the waters. Like I think people forget that the commandments that we're obeying are not just what's laid down in the scriptures. That's to give us faith and to set some underlying principles. But the gospel that we have to live now, we have to actively be seeking revelation and commandments from God. Like if we're not seeking that personal connection, trying to find and seek God to be face to face with him, I think we're missing out on the whole point of actually being capable of receiving his commandments. It's not just like, oh, I read it in a book somewhere. It's no, I received it from my Lord and my Savior, and so I'm going to go do.
And on top, I first of all love it, and on top of that, he received revelation that was able to affect his whole family, like affect his whole. I want to say this correctly, affect his whole ascension and king, like everything about his story. I'm not saying this correctly because I'm trying to hold back certain things, but let's say it like this. Imagine if Nephi and Lehi if their family had never left Jerusalem, would we know anything about them? And on top of that, would they have made any impact on history? None that we 1,000 years later or whatever, no one knows anything. 500, 200 years later, no one knows anything. There would be no impact. It would be, like whatever. And instead we have so many great things that have come from it. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Adams, is that like absolutely Nephi took the personal revelation and the revelation for other people, and it changed the outcome, but also that's his ascension story. That's his. I'm not saying it right, but he was crowned king and queen at some point.
Yeah, well, I hear in church a lot of people. So a lot of people of faith, and myself included, are like, I haven't seen Christ, I haven't seen God. Even though that's kind of what we want in our hearts to some degree, but I still have a testimony, and I'm all for that. I'm all for having faith without seeing, believing without seeing. That's the first step. I don't think though that we should stop there. I think we should be kind of like Nephi, who's like, hey, I want to know more about what my father saw. In fact, I would like to see what he saw. Now, that doesn't mean that God has to do any of those things we want to do, and we might go our entire lives without seeing God or seeing angels or whatnot. But I kind of view it like this is kind of a weird example. There was before I was married, I kind of had to put it on the mindset that like, what, there's a chance I might not get married. But you know what? I'm not going to stop trying. There's a good chance I might never see God in this life. or I might not be ministered unto angels, or have the fulfillment of faith that maybe I desire, but I'm going to live in a way that hopefully will allow me to have that at some point, you know. And if that doesn't happen, that's okay, but I'm not going to stop trying.
I think that's a great point, and that also implies to me, at least, there's two things. One, that there's probably actually a lot of people out there who they're they probably don't like if they're righteous enough and they're in the right place to receive these kind of revelations, they're probably not sharing them. They're casting pearls before swine. They're not sharing with everyone these things because that's unhelpful. That's not what God gave them for. But the second thing is, I was talking to Jared about this, and I think that every time we say something like that, we also need to do what you did after, which was testify of your knowledge. Like you're like, oh, I there's a lot of people who haven't seen God, and maybe I haven't seen God, but then what's the next step? Next step, you need to testify. But I believe in God still, and I know that I can, one day I'll see him face to face. In this life or the next, I don't know, but I will. And I think that's something we need to make sure we do, is to continue to testify of the things we do know.
Yeah, I was just concerned about the people stopping right before the mark. They're like, well, I tried to get married, or I tried to do these really important things, but it turned out to be too difficult, so I stopped. Or that God, because at the end of the day, it's not us who decides if we see God or not. Like, it's not us that decides if the Holy Spirit's going to grant to us revelation or anything of the sort. That's given unto us through our faith and our obedience. But those are the prerequisites. That's still not the thing that's doing the action. Like, we're not the giver. And so just like in marriage, in a lot of ways, I worry that too many people stop short of trying just because they realize at some point that it's really difficult and it's not up to them. But that doesn't mean you should stop living your life in a way that could. And that's something I need to tell myself. I'm saying it as if I've already figured it out, and I haven't.
But the first step is saying it. The first step is saying it, because if you don't ever say it, then you're not going to be reinforcing that belief. So
yeah, I just am putting a disclaimer out there that I am not trying to make myself sound righteous, because I certainly have many flaws that I'm working on.
You're allowed to have opinions, beliefs, and stuff, and still not be perfect. You're allowed that, Adams.
Exactly.
I'm glad.
I want people to know that I say these things because they're true, not because I'm necessarily living them perfectly.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it a bunch, Adams. I hope that this has, at least for me, I feel like this has really changed my opinion on it. I know that there's some points that you were bringing up. I want to say this correctly. There were some, you were like, hey, look, this, and this. If we read it like that, that really, it does change the point of view. But I think that what you and Marty said at the end were the really important things. We're like, but how does the story, how does it actually change how we live? Like, what do we need to do? So I appreciate that. So anyway, I think we're good, and I think that was a good place to end with your last point, unless there's anything else you want to add. Okay. Well,
I'm good.
Thanks a bunch, and we'll see you guys next time.